Google has excellent API, but sometimes you need additional exertions for solving quite simple issues. As an example, when you try to list files from shared for any one folder, you quickly realize that all API in Google is under billing. So if you don't want to bother your potential users with strange questions like this, why I should provide access to my drive for unknown application, you as implementer have no choice. Front-end can't make that simple request, so we need to delegate that request to the backend. That short video tells you how to create code on Python for getting a precious token and use it to resolve the issue. Google uses OAuth 2 technology for protecting its API. Here is a quite boring document that describes details about getting token. Process has two phases: creating a JSON web token and request a real token with it. So let's try to implement that. The first question is why we don't use existing package like pygvt. The answer is simple: dependencies. Look more closely at the pygwt package. In pygwt package we have a dependency to the cryptography package, but cryptography package has a more mature alternative called pycryptodom. The differences between packages show on the slide. In my opinion, pycryptodom a much more serious library than cryptography, and in addition, OpenSSL that under the hood of cryptography allocates memory that is not managed by Python. So that two reasons were enough for me to make a question: could we implement getting token from Google only with aiohttp and pycryptodom? As a remark, in this video we are going to use some service account. For more details, see the preparing materials video. First of all, let's create a new project on Github. Github provides us quite simple interface for this deal. Here instructions for us what we should do on the local computer. After clone, we get our little project on the local drive. I add some additional helper files for the quick start. The file builder helps us to quickly create virtual environment. Let's wrap our test into test case. Test case is a special class in unit test framework. It's quite convenient because we easily can maintain other cases in one place. It's a very good practice for development. Now we have our test here, and let's run helper file called builder to create the virtual environment. It don't take a lot of time, but it depends from our internet connection speed. As for the next step, we could reload the code for switch on test discovery. Please keep in mind that plugins for Discover tests should be additionally installed. After success discover, code highlight an ability to run and debug test. So let's try to implement description from Google Help inside our test. First of all, we try to find some code in the internet that resolve similar issue. I found that on Programmer's Salt site, and it do almost the same what we want. As I explained in preparing materials to that video for access to Google API and getting token, we need to register some service account as one of the options. Another options like use API key and OAuth client ID and secret we are not considering. Now we are creating Gitignore files that help us to maintain sensitive and renewable information. Download generated private key for service account to our local drive. It helps us further. We download that artifact to the folder that marked in our Gitignore file. Let's create setup method that loads sensitive information to the environment variables. The links to the sensitive information in our case are all in the .build file. We were adding it earlier to the Gitignore file. It's quite important because in the worst case, the sensitive information could suddenly be committed to the Git repository. And then let's check that all is good, and it certainly as we suppose. Okay. And now let's run test. Click on the debug link, and we are sure that all that we perceived realized. Okay, looks good. It's a very good practice to name tests accordingly to the test sense. Let's have a little talk about unit tests. Why we should spend time on the test's development. Not an easy question, especially for Python, where we could easily check everything. The common way to create unit tests is just simple automation of little manual check. But manual tests have birth injury itself, because we should remember all details not only about the function, but about the context too. So we need to keep a lot of junk information in our heads. It's real tedious. When done well, unit tests could improve development velocity, decrease the number of defects, expose defects early in the development life cycle, and it has indirect effects on code reuse and readability. In the first 50 years of computer history, unit testing and debugging were essentially the same things. But later, code became so complex, so unit tests split from debugging. In 1997, programmer Ken Beck invented GUnit, a plugin to test small pieces of code. 2 years later, Martin Fowler published his famous book titled Refactoring. These two guys actively promoted a very interesting approach to the software development. that process called test-driven development, or TDD. In TDD, the unit test creation is essential to the development process. What the code does and its exception conditions are defined and testable. One of the benefits of the TDD approach that the project code still remains at the human explorable level during the project's life cycle. Let's call getHTTP request from the code. aiohttp package provides us interface that is good enough for our goal. When we use the with keyword, connection to the API is closing automatically after exit from the with block of code. Now we are going to request a list of files from the shared folder. Google Drive API provides us query syntax that help us. What is important that query should be encoded, cause it passed through URL string into get HTTP request. In our case, we just care about space and quote symbols. When we are writing a test, we need to jump from synchronous code to the asynchronous code territory. Perhaps it's quite tricky at first look, because asynchronous code is wrapped into a method that is marked with async keyword. But in Python, with the ability to define named methods inside another block of code, it looks not so terrifying. And all we need is to get some event loop and path this method into the loop. So we are finishing our test, adding a real assertion and jumping to the finish line. Now most code looks good and ready to test run. But I forgot something. Of course, we need to pass sensitive information into the code. In our case, it's just a service account. Discussion about optimal ways to pass sensitive information is out of our little test. I'll only notice that a really good way is starting from the requirements, because some ways of implementation will be much more expensive than others. So let's run the test. Bump! The test fails. So we deep dive into the bug fix process. The bug fix is a fix for issues found through the development lifecycle, but before any release. It has zero impact on users and it's applied during production or testing phases. Now we are beginning to understand why we need to use an additional cryptography package. After a short investigation, I've noticed that we use too simple a cryptography algorithm for access to Google API. So now we have become to understand how we should use generated in Google Cloud Console security key. Let's load this key into the cryptography machine. We commented out some lines of code to control the impact of using the foreign package. As we will see further, we don't need to change a lot of code, only a few lines, not more. And of course, we need to import some used packages. Okay, here. Why we should care about the usage of foreign packages? It's a very good question. Suppose your team participates in a tug of war with some concurrent team. And you suppose, okay, very good, is that good, big, beefy guy help us? But suddenly he makes a decision through the development of the package, or change license, or any other worse thing. But you certainly don't expect this. So, because your code has further chances to rust, the habit to reduce dependencies is a good practice, and your project will float independence of the weather. And we try to start the test again. Very exciting moment, bump! We have the same error. Nightmare for the developers. I did something else, but get the same error. Where's the reason? Where? Of course. The name of algorithm. Okay. Let's try to rerun with that information. Wow! Success! It looks good. Oh, great. In conclusion, we'll look through the development test, and we've seen that it's certainly possible to get token and use as minimal dependencies as possible. All code available under Apache 2 license on my GitHub account. Thanks for watching. Bye.